So, um, welcome back to the deep dive. We have a topic today that I think is, well, it's going to make some people uncomfortable.
Oh, it definitely made me uncomfortable.
Yeah, right. Because while I was reading through the research stack for this one,
Yeah.
I kept having these moments of realizing I do exactly what they're saying not to do. We're talking about thinking for yourself today.
Yeah, which is it's kind of the ultimate meta skill, right? And frankly, it's the one skill that we all just assume we already have.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
If I walked up to literally anyone on the street and just asked, hey, do you think for yourself? They would look at me like I was crazy. Say, well, of course I do. I'm not a robot. I'm not a sheep.
Yeah, exactly. But we have this massive amount of documentation here. I mean, we're looking at insights from cognitive psychology, behavioral economics, philosophy, and even some algorithmic theory. And they all point to one slightly terrifying conclusion.
Which is that most of the time, we're running on complete autopilot.
Right. It's the perfect analogy, really. Autopilot versus manual override. If you look at the way the human brain is wired biologically, and then you look at the way the modern world is designed, you start to realize that most of us are moving through life accepting thoughts, beliefs, and reactions that we didn't actually generate.
We just inherited them.
Inherit them or absorb them from our environment like a sponge.
That is, it's a bit unsettling to think about. It's like finding out you've been a passenger in your own car for the last 10 years when you totally thought you were the one driving.
In many ways, yes. And we have to be super clear right up front here. This isn't an insult. It's not a character flaw. It's literally biology. Your brain is an incredibly energy-expensive organ. It consumes about 20% of your body's metabolic energy.
Despite being what, like a tiny fraction of your actual body weight?
Exactly. So if you had to derive every single decision from first principles, like how to tie your shoes, which route to drive to work, what social greeting to use when you see your neighbor, what brand of toothpaste to buy you, would be completely exhausted by 9:00 a.m.
You just wouldn't be able to function at all.
You'd be paralyzed. So the brain creates shortcuts. It creates these heuristics.
It creates scripts, basically.
Yes, exactly, scripts. When X happens, do Y. When someone says this specific phrase, feel that specific emotion, it's incredibly efficient. It is a survival mechanism that kept us alive on the savannah.
But the problem, and I think this is really the core of what we're doing in this deep dive today, is when we let those efficiency scripts drive our entire worldview.
Right. When we let the autopilot handle the really big stuff, our core values, our political beliefs, our fundamental understanding of what is true and what is false.
And that is the problem outlined in all of our sources today.
Right.
It's not just that we are biologically lazy or efficient. It's that the world right now is actively designed to think for you.
Oh, absolutely. It's industrialized.
Right? Between the algorithms curating what you see, the intense social pressure telling you what's acceptable to say out loud, and the 24-hour news cycle just constantly curating your reality-independent thought, is fighting a seriously steep uphill battle.
Think about the news feed on your phone. The algorithm isn't actually designed to show you the truth. It's designed to show you what keeps you engaged.
That keeps you scrolling.
Yes. And usually what keeps you engaged is what validates what you already think or what makes you angry at the people you already dislike. So you aren't actually exploring the world. You are exploring a mirror maze of your own existing biases.
So before we get into the how-to of this, because we do have a really solid toolkit to get through today,
Yeah.
let's define what we actually mean by independent thinking. Because when I hear independent thinker, I sometimes picture that one guy at a dinner party who just disagrees with everyone for sport. You know the type.
Oh, yeah, the professional contrarian.
Right. And they just have to be different.
And that is such a crucial distinction to make right now. Thinking for yourself is not about being a contrarian. It isn't about being a skeptic of everything just to be difficult or edgy.
Because if you reflexively reject every single mainstream view, if you look at the sky and say it's green just because a news anchor said it was blue, you are actually just as intellectually lazy as the person who blindly accepts everything.
That's a great point. If you always have to take the opposite side, you are still totally tethered to the original idea. You aren't free. You're just a negative image of the crowd.
You're still letting the external idea dictate your position. You're just putting a minus sign in front of it.
Exactly. The definition we are working with today for you, the listener, is about taking responsibility for your beliefs. It is about moving from being a passive consumer of information to an active architect of your own understanding.
Active architect, I really like that phrase.
Yeah, it implies design. It implies intentional effort. It means you can explain why you believe something, and that explanation goes way deeper than, I read it somewhere, or, well, that's just what good people believe. It means you have built the structure yourself, brick by brick.
So our mission today is to help you build that architecture. We are going to look at the best practices of independent thinking. We have broken this down into a roadmap based on all the research. We'll start with the foundation, which is your mindset and identity.
The soil, basically.
Right. Then we'll look at the input, how you curate what actually gets into your brain. Then the process, which is the actual mechanics of reasoning.
Yeah.
And finally, the output, how to solidify those thoughts so they don't just evaporate.
It's a complete operating system.
Let's jump right into the foundation then. Section 1 is mindset and identity. And the very first concept that kept popping up over and over in the research is something called intellectual humility.
This is the superpower. And I call it a superpower because it is incredibly rare to actually see it in the wild. Intellectual humility is essentially the willingness to just say, I don't know.
Which honestly feels like a huge weakness, especially in a professional setting. Like if I'm in a meeting with my boss and a client, and I say, I don't know, I feel like I'm losing status right there. I feel like I'm admitting complete incompetence.
Oh, for sure. In a performance-driven culture, it absolutely feels that way. But in the realm of actual thinking, it is the ultimate power move. Think about it this way. If you are afraid to say, I don't know, you are forced to pick a side or form an opinion before you actually have the facts.
You lock yourself in prematurely.
You plant a flag in the ground just to prove you have a flag.
Right. And once that flag is planted, a psychological mechanism kicks in, right? The research calls it consistency bias.
Yes, consistency bias. You now feel an immense internal and social pressure to defend that flag, even if you planted it in a total swamp. You will warp reality to defend a guess you made 5 minutes ago, just so you don't look wishy-washy.
So by admitting ignorance up front, by saying I don't know yet, you protect your ability to process information without that bias.
You are keeping your options open until the evidence is actually in. The research makes a really sharp distinction between confidence in your process versus stubborn attachment to your conclusions.
You want to be confident that you have a good way of figuring things out. Like, I have the tools to find the answer.
Right. But you should hold the actual conclusions very loosely. You want to be a scout who is just mapping the terrain, not a soldier who is defending a fortress.
So how do we actually practice this? Because in the heat of the moment when someone challenges us on a topic, our ego just wants to win the argument.
It does. It's a threat response. But one actionable takeaway from the sources is a really simple question you can ask yourself. When you run into an opposing view that makes you bristle, ask what would have to be true for this opposing view to be correct.
Oh, wow, that totally flips the script.
It forces a perspective shift. Instead of immediately looking for all the reasons they are wrong, you enter a mental simulation where they might actually be right. You have to model their world.
It forces your brain to look at the variables differently instead of just loading up your counter-arguments.
Exactly. It opens the mind to possibilities you previously dismissed because you were too busy preparing your rebuttal while they were still talking.
And I think that leads perfectly into the next part of the foundation, which is detaching your identity from your ideas. This is the trap of the I am statement. I am a Democrat, I am a vegan, I am a Bitcoin maximalist.
This is arguably one of the most dangerous habits we have as a society right now. When we treat opinions as possessions or as identity markers, we defend them as if we are defending our actual physical bodies.
Right, because if I tell you your shirt is ugly, you might be annoyed. But if I tell you your soul is ugly, you're going to fight me.
Exactly. And when we attach I am to an idea, we are effectively making it part of our soul. So if someone attacks the idea, if they say veganism isn't healthy or Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, you don't hear a critique of the diet or the asset.
You hear a direct threat to you as a person.
You hear a survival threat, and the amygdala, the lizard brain, just takes over completely. You go straight into fight or flight mode.
And the research is clear that you literally cannot think critically when you are in fight or flight.
You are basically lobotomized in that state.
Yeah.
Your prefrontal cortex, the part that does the high-level reasoning, shuts down to prioritize basic survival. So if you tie your identity to your ideas, you are literally making yourself stupid every single time someone disagrees with you.
Oof, that is harsh, but it makes so much sense. So what is the fix here? How do we linguistically shift this so we don't trigger the lizard brain?
We need to treat opinions as working drafts or as tools. You don't get deeply offended if someone tells you your hammer isn't the right tool for a specific job. You just put it down and grab a screwdriver. We need to do the exact same thing with our ideas.
The sources suggest a really subtle change in language for this. Instead of saying, I am a proponent of X, try saying, I currently think X, or current evidence suggest X.
I currently think is brilliant. It implies right in the phrasing that it could change tomorrow. It leaves the door wide open for an update.
It reduces the defensiveness immediately. It signals to your own brain and to the person you're talking to that you are open to new data.
It completely decouples your ego from the argument. It makes the conversation about the idea out there on the table, not about your worth as a human being sitting in the chair.
Now, there's one more pillar in this foundation section, and that's epistemic habits. Can you unpack that word for us? Epistemic.
Sure, epistemology is simply the branch of philosophy concerned with knowledge. It asks, how do we actually know what we know? So developing epistemic habits means being rigorously disciplined about distinguishing between what you know, what you think, and what you feel.
Man, those three get tangled up constantly, don't they?
All day, every day. Often, a fiercely confident opinion is just an emotional reaction wearing the costume of a reasoned conclusion. You feel something strongly, maybe outrage, maybe deep hope, and your brain instantly rationalizes it into a hard fact.
Like, I feel angry about this headline, therefore this headline must be true and the world is terrible.
Exactly. So the habit here is to stop and check your work. For any strongly held view you have to run a diagnostic. Ask yourself, where did this actually come from? Did I reason my way to this conclusion step by step, or did I just absorb it from my Twitter feed, my parents, or my peer group?
That is a brutally tough question to answer, honestly.
Yeah.
Did I reason my way to this? I think if we're honest with ourselves for 90% of our daily opinions, the answer is probably no. I just picked it up because everyone around me was holding it.
And we should clarify that that is okay to some extent. You cannot derive everything from first principles every single day. You'd never get out of bed. You have to trust experts on how to build a commercial airplane or how to perform open heart surgery.
Or you can't independently verify gravity every morning.
But for the things that really matter, for the core beliefs that guide your life, your votes, your investments, your relationships, you need to know if you are the author of those beliefs or if you are just reading a script somebody else handed you.
Okay, so we have established a really solid foundation. We are practicing humility, we are not our ideas, and we are checking the origins of our beliefs. Now let's talk about the raw material we use to build. Section 2 is the input. How do we curate our information diet?
This is critical because your output is only ever as good as your input. Garbage in, garbage out. If you eat junk food all day, your body performs poorly. If you consume junk information, your thinking performs poorly. And the biggest danger in the modern information ecosystem is the echo chamber.
We hear that term all the time. But why is it so specifically dangerous for the mechanics of thinking?
Because if you only read people you already agree with, you aren't actually thinking, you are just validating. You are getting a cheap dopamine hit of, yes, I am right and those other people are wrong. It feels incredibly good. It is comforting, but it causes severe intellectual atrophy.
Like a muscle you stop using.
Exactly. You lose the ability to handle nuance or complexity because your views are never stress tested. You become fragile.
So the actionable advice here isn't just to read more books or consume more news. It's to intentionally diversify.
Highly intentionally. The advice from the sources is to actively find one article or follow one thinker you strongly disagree with. And caveat here, not a troll. You want to find someone who is smart, articulate, and well-intentioned, who just happens to see the world completely differently than you do.
That distinction is so important. Don't go follow the person who is just trying to make your side mad for engagement. Follow the person who represents the absolute smartest version of the opposing side.
Right. You want to genuinely understand their internal logic. Also, you should read authors from different countries and different cultures. If you only read U.S.-centric tech news, you have a very specific and, frankly, narrow view of where the future is heading. You need to see the global board from different angles.
There is a rule in the research here that I found really fascinating. It's called think first, consume second. How does that play out in real life?
This is a daily exercise in mental discipline. Let's say a massive news event happens, a controversial new law is passed, or a major tech company crashes. The modern impulse, our default setting, is to immediately go to social media or our favorite news site to see what the take is.
Right. We want to know what our team thinks about this so we know how to feel. Is this a win or a loss?
Exactly. You are completely outsourcing the cognitive processing. The think first rule says you have to stop. Go read the primary source. Read the actual text of the bill, look at the actual quarterly earnings report, and then form a rough, jagged, unpolished opinion before you read a single word of commentary.
Even if your rough opinion ends up being wrong or incomplete.
Yes, even if it is totally off base. The act of trying to figure it out yourself is the exercise. You are building the muscle of independent judgment. Then afterward, you can go see what the experts say and adjust your view. But you have forced your own brain to do the heavy lifting first.
That is genuinely hard to do. It is so much easier to let the pundits chew the food for you and just swallow it.
It is much easier. But again, that is the autopilot. We are trying to switch to manual control.
Now, once we are actively engaging with these opposing views, there is a technique mentioned in the stack called steel manning. Now, I think most people have heard of straw manning, which is what we see politicians do on TV every night.
Right. Straw manning is taking the absolute weakest version of an opponent's argument. You find the silliest thing they said or the most extreme fringe version of their view, and you tear that apart. It makes you look super smart, and it makes them look ridiculously stupid.
It's like building a scarecrow and then beating it up and claiming you want to fight.
It's intellectually dishonest. Steel manning is the exact opposite. You have to build the strongest, most robust possible version of the argument you disagree with. You fix their logical errors for them, you make their case as bulletproof as possible, you argue their side so incredibly well that they would look at you and say, yes, that is exactly what I mean.
But why would I spend my energy doing that for an idea I fundamentally hate?
Because it is the ultimate stress test for your own beliefs.
Yeah.
If you can argue the opposing view better than its own supporters can, and your original view still holds up in your mind, then you know your view is truly solid. You have actually earned the right to hold that opinion.
And what if you steel man their argument and you suddenly realize, wait a minute, this is actually a really good point and my original view is flawed?
Then you have just learned something new. That is the victory. The goal of thinking isn't to win a debate. The goal is to accurately map reality and find the truth. If the steel man knocks your argument down, you get up smarter than you were 5 minutes ago.
I love that. Okay, one last point on the input section. Interrogating our sources. The research talks heavily about distinguishing between expertise and authority. What's the dividing line there?
This is crucial right now, especially in the influencer age. Authority is simply a social position. It is a title. A CEO, a sitting politician, a celebrity, a person with 2 million followers and a blue check mark. Expertise, however, is deep domain-specific applied knowledge.
But our brains naturally conflate the two. We assume that because someone is a billionaire tech founder, they must also be an expert on public health or macroeconomics or the education system.
Right. That is a known cognitive bias called the halo effect. We assume that competence in one highly specific area automatically transfers to all other areas, and it usually doesn't. Just because someone has authority, meaning they have a very large platform, does not mean they have actual expertise in the specific thing they are tweeting about today. You need to be completely ruthless about asking, does this person actually know what they're talking about, or are they just famous?
And we also need to be ruthless about our own emotional reactions to these sources, right?
Yes. This relates to the affect heuristic. If a piece of information makes you feel a sudden intense emotion, whether that's intense righteous joy or intense blinding outrage, your logical skepticism shields immediately drop. You are statistically much more likely to share something that confirms your bias and makes you angry at the other side without ever pausing to check if it's actually factually true.
So if a headline makes you literally want to punch a wall or high-five the Noe, the person next to you, that specific moment, is the exact moment you need to pause and step back.
That intense emotion is the red flag. Emotion is very often used as a tool for manipulation in media. Real insight, real truth is usually cooler, calmer, a bit gray, and much more nuanced. If an article feels exactly like a Hollywood movie script with pure good guys and pure bad guys, it is almost certainly not the whole truth.
All right, let's move down into the engine room now. Section 3 is the mechanics. We have the right mindset. We have curated our inputs. How do we actually process this raw material? The first tool in the box here is first principles thinking. We hear Elon Musk talk about this a lot.
He does, and it's an incredibly powerful concept that actually goes all the way back to Aristotle and physics. To understand it, you have to contrast it with how most people think, which is thinking by analogy. We do things a certain way because, well, that's how it's always been done, or it's like this other thing over here. It's essentially reasoning by copying.
Which works fine for routine things like getting dressed in the morning.
Sure, it's efficient. It's the equivalent of being a cook who just follows a recipe card. But for solving genuinely hard problems or forming unique worldviews, you need to be the chef. You need to fundamentally understand the raw ingredients. First principles thinking involves breaking a complex problem down to its most fundamental truths, the absolute bedrock facts that remain when you strip away every single assumption and convention.
Can you give us an example of how this actually works in practice?
Let's look at the famous SpaceX example because it perfectly illustrates the concept. When Musk started looking into rockets, people in the aerospace industry said you can't build cheap rockets. Battery packs for aerospace are just astronomically expensive. They cost about $600 per kilowatt hour. That's just the market price. That is the analogy.
Right, everyone just accepts that's what they cost.
Exactly. But first principles thinking stops and asks why. What is a battery actually made of? Well, it's made of cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, and some polymers. Okay, if we bought those exact raw materials on the London Metal Exchange today, what would they cost? The answer was about $80 per kilowatt hour. So clearly the fundamental cost isn't the materials themselves. The cost is embedded in the inefficient way people are combining them.
There is a massive gap between $80 and $600.
Right. And if you can figure out a smarter, completely new way to combine those base materials, you can entirely disrupt a legacy industry.
So it's essentially digging and digging until you hit the absolute floor, the point where you literally cannot ask why anymore because you've hit a law of physics or a hard mathematical reality.
Exactly. And then you build your conclusion back up from that solid floor. It is mentally exhausting, and you obviously can't do it for every trivial decision in your life, but it yields completely original answers. It frees you from the trap of how we've always done it.
Another mechanic mentioned in this section is the ladder of inference. I love a good visual metaphor. What exactly is this ladder?
This is a mental model developed by an organizational psychologist named Chris Argyris. It beautifully explains how we jump to conclusions. So imagine a ladder in your mind. At the very bottom on the ground, you have the pool of data. This is everything that is actually objectively happening in reality. A video camera would record this.
Okay, so just pure, unfiltered facts.
Right. The next run-up is selecting data. You physically cannot notice everything in reality, so your brain selectively picks a few specific facts to focus on. The next rung-up is interpreting meaning. You assign a subjective story to that selected data, and then the top rung is adopting a belief or taking an action based on that story.
Okay, walk me through a real-world scenario so we can picture this.
Sure, let's use a very common one. Scenario, you send an important text message to a good friend. They do not reply for 6 solid hours. That is the pure data on the ground.
Just a timestamp cap.
Right. Now you move up a rung and select data. You intensely focus on the time delay, but you completely ignore the fact that they told you yesterday they had a huge project due at work or that their phone battery was dying. You only select the delay.
Got it.
Then you move up to interpret meaning. You tell yourself a story. They are intentionally ignoring me. They must be mad about that joke I made at dinner last week. Then you hit the top rung and adopt a belief. This person is passive-aggressive and honestly not a very supportive friend. And finally, you take action. You send a incredibly snarky follow-up text.
Wow. And you probably ran out the entire ladder in a split second without even realizing it. And once you were at the top of the ladder, firmly believing they are a bad friend, every other thing they do from then on gets filtered through that negative belief.
Exactly. You have effectively created a serious conflict out of thin air based on a hallucinated story. The fix here, the manual override, is to learn to consciously walk back down the ladder. When you feel a heavy judgment lock-in, like my boss secretly hates me or this friend is toxic, you have to stop. Ask yourself, wait, what specific piece of objective data led me to this massive conclusion? Is there any other plausible way to interpret that exact same data?
That seems incredibly useful for personal relationships, not just abstract intellectual thinking.
It is entirely universal. It prevents you from hallucinating patterns and motives that simply aren't there. It forces you to rigorously separate the internal story you tell yourself from the objective facts on the ground.
Now, we cannot talk about the mechanics of thinking without talking about the major bugs in the human software. The biases. The list in the research is huge, but we have 3 big ones we need to actively fight. Confirmation bias, availability heuristic, and social proof.
Yes, the unholy trinity of bad thinking. Confirmation bias is the king. We absolutely love information that tells us we were right all along. It feels physically good. The counter move here has to be aggressive. You have to actively hunt for evidence that proves you wrong.
It's like being a scientist whose main job is to disprove their own beloved hypothesis.
Precisely. If you strongly believe remote work kills company productivity, do not go to Google and type why remote work is bad. You will just find articles agreeing with you. You have to Google the hidden benefits of remote work. Try your hardest to break your own theory. If you try to break it and you can't, your theory actually gets much stronger.
Then there's the availability heuristic, which is where we wildly overestimate the importance or frequency of information we just heard recently.
Yes. Shark attacks are the classic example.
Right. If you see 3 news stories about shark attacks in a single week,
Yeah.
you immediately think, Oh my gosh, shark attacks are skyrocketing. It's a global crisis.
Yeah.
But statistically, they aren't at all. They're just highly available in your short-term memory because the news cycle hyped them up for clicks.
So the counter to that is to always look at long-term data. You have to ignore the vivid, terrifying anecdote and go look at the boring, multi-year trend line. Always look for the base rate.
And finally, social proof. Assuming the crowd must be right. If everyone around you is running towards an exit door, you run too.
Which totally makes evolutionary sense if you are in a burning building. You survive by copying the herd. But in the stock market or in a political election, it is disastrous. The question to ask yourself to break social proof is, would I still believe this specific thing if I were the only person in the room? Is the idea actually true on its own merits, or does it just feel true because 1,000 people I follow are retweeting it?
I want to add one more mechanic here that really stood out to me. Probabilistic thinking. This is the idea of replacing absolute certainties with percentages.
This is an absolute game changer for mental flexibility. Human beings naturally tend to think in binary terms. Is this true or false? Will this startup succeed or fail? Probabilistic thinking replaces that rigid light switch with a fluid dimmer switch. Instead of saying, I believe X will happen, try saying, I think there's a 70% chance X is true.
What does that subtle shift actually do for our brains?
It immediately keeps your identity and your ego out of the prediction. If you say the market will absolutely crash tomorrow and it doesn't bout, you are entirely wrong. Your ego takes a massive hit. You look foolish. But if you say there is a 70% chance of a crash and it doesn't happen, you weren't technically wrong. The 30% outcome just happened to materialize. It allows you to constantly update your beliefs, which in statistics is called Bayesian updating, as new evidence arrives without feeling like a hypocrite.
It turns thinking into a dial you adjust rather than a fortress you have to defend to the death. You can say, okay, a new economic report just dropped, so I'm lowering my probability from 70 to 40%.
Exactly. It makes you an agile learner rather than a rigid defender. You are constantly calibrating your internal model of the world.
All right, we are moving on to section 4 now, the output. We have done the hard work of thinking. How do we actually crystallize it? Because the sources are totally unanimous on this one point. You have to write.
Writing to think. This is, without a doubt, the most underutilized tool in the entire toolkit. Many people view writing simply as a record of thought, like I already had a brilliant thought and now I will just write it down to save it for later. No, writing is the actual process of thinking. You genuinely do not know what you think until you try to force it into a complete grammatically correct sentence.
I have definitely had that exact experience where I think I have this incredible, brilliant idea while I'm in the shower, and then I sit down and start explaining it to my coworker, and it just totally dissolves into nonsense. It was just a vague vibe. It wasn't a coherent thought.
Vague thoughts die under the pressure of the page. That is exactly why writing is so difficult and painful. It forces you to be brutally specific. The recommendation from the research is to keep a journal, but specifically a decision journal.
What exactly goes into a decision journal compared to a normal diary?
When you are about to make a major life or business decision, hiring a new executive, investing a large sum of money, moving across the country, you write down exactly why you are doing it, what you expect to happen, and what variables you consider most important. And you have to do this before the outcome is known.
I see. So that prevents hindsight bias later on.
Exactly. 6 months later, if the new hire is a disaster, your brain will automatically try to rewrite history to protect your ego. It will say, well, I always knew it was a huge risk. But you can open your decision journal and see your own handwriting saying, actually, I thought this person was a guaranteed home run. It forces you to confront the actual quality of your decision-making process, completely separate from the dumb luck of the final result.
And for more day-to-day thinking, there's a specific technique mentioned here called the one-page argument.
It is simple and brutal. You write your core claim, then you write your logical reasoning, then you list your supporting evidence. And finally, and this is the most important part, you write the strongest counter-argument. If you cannot fit all of that clearly onto one single page, you haven't distilled it enough. You don't actually understand the topic yet.
Next up in the output section is the need for solitude. We literally need monk mode.
Original thought acts very much like a shy animal in the woods. It simply does not come out when there is a ton of loud noise. If you are constantly plugged into podcasts, music, Slack messages, and email all day long, you are entirely spending your brain's processing power on other people's output. You have zero cognitive bandwidth left to generate any of your own.
So we basically need to allow ourselves to be bored again.
Boredom is incredibly fertile ground for the mind. It is when the brain finally starts making background connections. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network. It spins up specifically when you aren't intensely focusing on an external task. That is exactly why you get your best ideas in the shower or while washing dishes. The actionable advice here is to literally schedule deep focus time, 25 to 60 minutes. Or take a thinking walk. No phone in your pocket, no headphones. Just you and your own thoughts.
Honestly, that sounds genuinely terrifying to a lot of modern people. Just walking outside alone with your thoughts for an hour.
It can be very uncomfortable at first, but that is where the actual synthesis of ideas happens. That is where your brain connects the random article you read last Tuesday with the weird conversation you had this morning. If you fill every single gap in your day with external content, you never give those disparate connections a chance to form.
And the final piece of the output puzzle we have here is delaying judgment, the 24-hour rule.
We live in a relentless hot take economy right now. Something big happens in the news, and we feel immense social pressure to have a fully formed view immediately. What is your statement on this crisis? The 24-hour rule is a self-imposed cooling off period. For any emotionally charged topic or major life decision, you simply do not allow yourself to finalize an opinion or post publicly for 24 hours.
Which obviously prevents you from saying something embarrassing you'll regret,
Yeah.
but it also gives your subconscious mind time to actually work the problem.
It does. It lets the emotional sediment settle down so you can finally see the water clearly. And there is real profound strength in ambiguity. Being able to look someone in the eye and say, honestly, I haven't thought about this complex issue enough to have a firm view yet, is a sign of immense intellectual strength, not weakness. If a massive geopolitical question feels too cleanly resolved in your head after 5 minutes, you have almost certainly just accepted someone else's prepackaged framing.
All right, we are heading to the home stretch here. Section 5 is the social reality. We really have to talk about the cost of all this, because if you actually do all these things, if you rigorously question assumptions, delay your judgment, refuse to take immediate sides, you might become kind of annoying to be around, or at least it can get pretty lonely.
It is deeply uncomfortable. Let's not sugarcoat it. Thinking for yourself very often leads to conclusions that simply do not fit neatly into any pre-existing tribe. You might end up with a view on macroeconomics that sounds deeply conservative and a view on urban planning that sounds radically liberal. You just don't fit in the neat little box anymore.
And humans desperately love boxes. We love our tribes, just how we socialize.
We need them for safety and community. But here is the ultimate warning from the behavioral research. If your personal views always align 100% perfectly with your social group, your profession, or your chosen political party, that is a mathematical and statistical impossibility if you are truly thinking independently. It means you are conforming. Genuine independent thought always produces heterodox results. It produces a messy mix.
So if you find yourself agreeing with your specific friend group on literally every single major issue, you should actually be worried.
You should be very worried. It indicates you are prioritizing social belonging over the actual truth.
There is a really confronting exercise to test this called the tribalism flip.
Yes. You have to ask yourself honestly, if my chosen tribe believed the exact opposite of this, what would I think? Or let's say a policy is proposed. Ask yourself if the political party I absolutely despise proposed this exact same policy. Would I still support it, or would I ruthlessly attack it?
Oh man, that is painful to do because very often the honest answer is I would absolutely hate it if they did it.
And realizing that reveals that your opinion is based entirely on who is doing the action, not what is actually being done. That isn't thinking. That is just sports cheerleading.
Finally, let's talk about creative imitation before we wrap up, because we have spent this whole time talking about not copying other people. But we also don't want to pretend we are isolated geniuses inventing everything from scratch in a cave.
No, definitely not. No thought is ever born in a total vacuum. Originality is usually just really smart remixing. You take a proven idea from biology, like evolutionary mutation, and you apply it to software business models. You take a concept from classical architecture and you apply it to writing computer code. That intersection is where the real magic happens. You acknowledge the original source, but you add your unique perspective and your specific lived experience.
It's like the yes and rule in improv comedy applied to intellectual thinking.
Exactly. You aren't just a dumb echo. You are an active synthesizer of the world around you.
So let's bring this all home for the listener. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. Mindset, input, mechanics, output, and the social reality. What is the grand so what of all this? Why go through all this trouble? Honestly, it sounds completely exhausting.
It is high maintenance, it takes calories, it is infinitely easier to just stay on autopilot and let the feed dictate your reality. But the payoff is immense clarity. It leads to massively better decision-making in your career and your life. And ultimately, it is about true freedom. If you aren't thinking for yourself, you are literally acting out a script written by someone else, an unknown algorithm, a boss, a news anchor. By doing this rigorous work, you transform yourself from a passive reactor into an active agent in your own life.
That is incredibly powerful. You finally get to be the driver of the car.
You get to be the driver.
I want to leave everyone listening with one final, slightly provocative thought that I pulled from the very end of the research stack. It's a concept called selective ignorance.
Oh, this is an absolute favorite of mine. It's so relevant right now.
In this age of massive information overload, we often assume that being smart simply means knowing more facts than the next person. But maybe the actual smartest move right now is knowing exactly what to ignore.
Yes. Strategically ignoring the daily noise to actively protect your ability to process what actually matters long term. Human attention is a strictly finite resource. If you spend all your daily bandwidth on celebrity gossip, endless Twitter fights, and incredibly irrelevant outrage news, you have zero fuel left in the tank for the deep structural thinking we just talked about. You have to aggressively gatekeep your own mind. You have to ask yourself, are you intentionally controlling your attention, or is it being auctioned off to the highest bidder by an ad algorithm?
That is a phenomenal challenge for the week.
It really is the ultimate challenge of our era.
So here's our sign-off for you today. Please do not try to do all of this at once. You will just burn out. Pick one single best practice from today. Maybe try the 24-hour rule on your next big text message. Maybe try the steel manning exercise the next time you watch the news. Or maybe just practice saying, I don't know out loud one time this week when you feel pressure to have a hot take. Just try it. See how it changes the architecture of your mind.
And really pay attention to how it changes the way you physically feel. You might find a really strange, wonderful sense of calm in simply not having to have a take on everything happening in the world.
I love that. A sense of calm. Thank you all so much for listening to this deep dive. Go switch over to manual control for a little while today. We will see you next time.
Stay curious out there.